Hey there, welcome to Ben's Eco Adventure and welcome to what was going to be a review of the Dodge Hornet RT, but things have gone sideways. Let's get into it. Well, I had a lot of plans for the Hornet video. I was going to do a driving review and talk about the technology and all that kind of stuff, but obviously something went sideways here. So instead, unfortunately, I'm just going to have to mostly talk to the camera in this video and kind of go over what happened. And I'll put in snippets here and there, maybe over top. I think I want to talk about basically three things: what happened with my experience, what I thought of the car in the limited time that I did have with it, and where do we go from here? What did we learn from this? So what happened? So I test drove a Dodge Hornet RT 2024 model that had been sitting around on a dealer's lot for about a year. And anytime you have stale inventory, you know the dealer is usually very motivated to move those cars. So while I wasn't necessarily set on buying one of these, to be sure, I was curious about it, especially if the price was right. I do want to give credit to the dealership. It was Byers Chrysler Jeep Dodge Ram in Whitehall, Ohio. They really were excellent to deal with, and the dealer was great. Obviously, the car, not so much. They let me test drive the car for a couple days, which was really nice because I wanted to try operating it both as a EV in fully electric mode and also in hybrid mode once the high voltage battery was depleted. So I got an opportunity actually to do both in the time that I had when the car was working. Basically what happened is after driving the car around for a little bit, I brought it home. I didn't plug it in. I wasn't charging the high voltage battery, and I just had it sitting here in my garage overnight. And when I came out the next day to try and start it, and I was just going to drive around a little bit, I got a million warning lights. I got the whole Christmas tree of lights, basically every single system through an error message. Now, usually when that happens, I know enough about cars to know that every single thing in the car didn't fail. It was a low voltage condition. And sure enough, I tested the battery voltage of the 12 volt battery, which it has just like any other conventional internal combustion car. And the battery was reading like 6 or 8 volts or something super low. So clearly what happened here is something was wrong with the programming with the car, and overnight it didn't go to sleep and it ended up draining the 12 volt battery. From what I can tell doing research about the Hornet online, the 12 volt battery issue is not entirely unique. I am still kind of disappointed though, because they took a while to actually get this car ready for me to test drive. When I called and talked about it, he thought all they needed to do was wash it because obviously it had been sitting outside for a while. But they actually had it in the shop from what the sales guy told me, and they were working on it. It had a brand new 12 volt battery when this happened. So that it should have had the latest software updates. I can't verify that for sure, but it had a new 12 volt battery almost certainly. And it still obviously had a pretty serious problem. I have a 12 volt jump pack that I've used on both internal combustion and EV cars before to rescue a dead 12 volt battery. And I did try using it on the Hornet. And I don't know if the car was just drawing too much energy or what happened, but I was not able to get the car into a ready to drive mode. And eventually, when I did actually get it sort of back up, it wasn't in ready to drive. The alarm started going off, which was a whole other thing. I ended up having to pull the fuse for the horn just so it would stop honking long enough for me to try and play around and see if I could get it going. Long story short, I didn't spend a ton of time trying to get the car going. I just called them and said, hey, if you guys want this car back, you're going to have to come pick it up. And so the sales guy was incredibly apologetic. I certainly appreciate that. And he was kind enough to come pick me up at my house, take me back where I had left this car. This is our Mazda CX-5. And so I could drive this home and not be without a car. So again, dealer was great, but tow truck was required in order to get the car out of the garage here. I was at least able to get the car charged up enough to release the electronic parking brake. And I had read in the owner's manual there's a manual shift release for the transmission gear selector where you can get it into neutral so that it didn't have to be dragged onto the tow truck bed. I'm curious, have you ever test drove a car and something like this happened where the car had some kind of pretty ridiculous problem? I actually have. I have one other experience. Back when I was a kid shopping for my first car, I looked at a Mercury Sable and I got to driving it about a mile down the road from the dealership, and I noticed some steam coming out and the car had some overheating messages. It turns out I think the car didn't have any coolant. Fortunately, I was able to turn around and bring it back to that dealer. Needless to say, I didn't buy that car either. But now I do actually want to talk about the car itself for a little bit. So in my time driving it, I actually came away more impressed with the car than I thought I would be. This, to me, seemed like a car that was maybe a little half-hearted, and it's a rebadge, obviously. It's really an Alfa Romeo Tonale, but they did a pretty good job with this car. I think it makes it more of a shame that this happened and that these cars generally don't seem to be holding up that well. Because if they did, I think they would actually have a fairly competitive product. When it was operating in EV only mode without the gas engine, I did notice it sounded like it had a kind of a low growl. The electric motor itself seemed to have that kind of noise. And I don't know if that's intentional, if they tried to put that in because Dodge is supposed to be kind of an aggressive brand that is brash and makes a lot of noise and whatever. But that was one thing I definitely noticed. It wasn't the quietest EV only experience that I've had. It was fairly smooth at least, but I will say too, with the car weighing around 2 tons or so, the acceleration in EV only mode is okay up to a point. But if you're merging onto the highway in fast traffic, you're probably going to need to dip into the gasoline engine and get a little boost from that too. I thought the car actually rode pretty well. It's a fairly firm ride. If you're familiar with other European cars, I think you'd probably find you'd feel right at home with it. This car had the 18-inch wheels. So if you had the 20-inch wheels that I know are optional, it might ride a little bit more harsh, but I found it perfectly acceptable and actually a little bit more comfortable than this Mazda. The car had moderate amounts of road noise and wind noise and everything. And I think I was actually the most impressed in terms of engine noise when it came to the gasoline engine. That little 1.3 liter 4-cylinder was very refined. It has a burble. If you're outside, you can definitely hear the exhaust a little bit. But when you're inside, it sounds really nice, really smooth. It's seemingly a very nice sounding engine. The handling of the car was pretty good, but not amazing. I did notice while the steering has a nice weight to it and feels a little bit heavy, but in a pretty reassuring kind of a way, there really wasn't a lot of road feel. That was one thing I was surprised. I'm used to European cars feeling very connected to the road. I used to have a Ford Focus, the electric one, and that car, when you're going steering around corners, like you can really feel what the car is doing. It was really engaging and rewarding in that sense to go around curves. The Hornet, not so much. It was fine, but I think it fell a little bit short of the mark of actually being a sporty car. And honestly, I think that was one of the biggest disappointments I had in terms of how the car drove. The interior I thought was pretty nice. They did a good job. The materials were of reasonable good quality. It's not a luxury car, but it's at least decent competitive with other cars in maybe the 30 to 40-ish $1,000 price. I thought the Uconnect system had some good points. I really liked the center instrument cluster in front of you, which is a full screen. You could put the map on there, and it was configurable with various displays and everything. And I thought that was really a highlight of the car. The resolution was good, but I did find that the center screen, the touch screen, was okay overall, but I found myself a couple times tapping, trying to get to a relatively small button and having to push a couple times because it didn't seem to take it the first time that I tapped. But the infotainment system seemed to work well. It was laid out in a reasonably logical kind of manner. I thought the other kind of ancillary controls were actually really good. It has physical climate controls, which I prefer. I think that was really nice. It has a regular gear selector. And it's funny sitting in this Mazda, looking at the gear selector at the Hornet, I feel like Stellantis must have benchmarked Mazda because the gear selector looks almost identical. The car feels a little bit cramped. There's not a ton of headroom, either front or back, but I had a decent amount of space as someone who's 5'11". I could sit in the back seat behind myself. Okay, I wasn't super comfortable, but it would have been all right for at least a moderate trip. The seating discussion brings up the one thing that, absent everything else that happened, one reason why I probably wouldn't buy this car. With my kiddo's car seat, it was very difficult to latch the seat belt. If you have a booster seat where the kid is just using the regular seat belt, the seats are so narrow that the buckle is right up next to the booster seat, but kind of wedged down in a little opening there. And I found it nearly impossible for me to buckle, and certainly for my kiddo, it just wasn't happening. So that would probably prevent me from buying the car, just absent everything else, because I need my kiddo to buckle up by themselves and not need parental assistance every time. Overall, I thought the Hornet was actually a pretty nice car. And absent the problems it had with obviously running its 12-volt battery down and the car seat issue, it might have actually been a car that I would consider buying, at least for the right price. But now we should get into the discussion of where do we go from here? What did we learn about plug-in hybrids and about Stellantis generally? If you've been following the auto industry at all lately, you've probably seen some of the same things I have. Stellantis is not doing very well. Yeah, that's not good. It's gotten to the point where nobody is winning here. The unions are mad, suppliers are mad, dealers are mad, customers are mad, and I don't think they're going about this the right way. I'll be the first person to say that building cars is hard. It is incredibly difficult to do what all these manufacturers do day in and day out, make a business case for it, make a profit, and just have cars that actually work most of the time. Stellantis has said that they're on this cost-cutting drive because they need to take on Chinese automakers, particularly Chinese electric car makers, and match them on price. That is certainly a tall order, and I don't know if anybody really has a super good idea of how to do that. Right now, certainly in North America, we're seeing big time tariffs. The likelihood of us seeing Chinese electric cars anytime soon is pretty small. And in Europe, I know there's having some discussions about putting some tariffs, not quite as severe, but everybody is nervous about the low-cost Chinese EVs. However, I think the CEO, Carlos Tavares, is going about this really the wrong way. If you want to be a discount brand, there's always going to be somebody who's going to be able to undercut you. And if you're like Stellantis, where you're kind of a mix-in of all these different companies, you've got Chrysler, you've got Fiat, you've got Peugeot, you've got Opel, Vauxhall, all these different brands with all this kind of legacy baggage that you're still trying to sort through. Being the low-cost producer is just not a logical business case. When Stellantis started basically at the beginning of 2021, I personally had high hopes for the company. I thought, here's a company with a bunch of iconic brands that maybe could do something really big, pool their engineering resources. Obviously, economies of scale are everything in the auto industry. And now they have this golden opportunity to have this kind of scale that very few other companies, we're talking they're in the likes of Toyota and Volkswagen. There aren't too many other companies that are quite this big, but so far, they're just totally blowing it. Really, the golden rule in the auto industry has to be don't piss off your customers. But we've seen these kind of quality glitches. The Hornet situation is not unique. Lots of other Stellantis products, not just the Hornet, but other Jeeps and Alfa Romeos and Chryslers and Rams and all those, we've just seen quality problems everywhere. And so when that's getting to the customer, that's a big deal. Almost all companies these days are pretty good on quality. Some are a little bit better than others, but the difference between best and worst is a lot smaller than it was, say, 20 years ago. But when you're Stellantis and you're at the bottom of the rung on most surveys that measure reliability, you've got a problem. As somebody who's followed the auto industry for decades now, I can tell you pretty much exactly what they're doing wrong. They're trying to get savings from basically all the wrong places, and they're trying to squeeze blood from a stone. And they're already at the point where it's not working, and they have even more aggressive targets coming up, it would seem. There's an industry survey done every year of automotive suppliers. And the automotive suppliers, those are people who make things like glass, or they'll make like air conditioning compressors or engine parts or batteries or anything that the automaker itself doesn't make for themselves. Now, these are big companies. We're talking like Bosch, if you've heard of, Denso's another big company, Magna, those kinds that range from giant multinational corporations all the way down to like little mom and pop tooling shop. For the last 10 years or so, Stellantis, when formerly Fiat and Chrysler, have consistently ranked lowest in terms of how the suppliers feel about their relationship with the automaker. So the supplier and the automaker's relationship is important, because if you have a good relationship, you're more willing to do whatever it takes to keep the customer happy. Whereas Stellantis has made it clear their objective, their one and only objective basically, is a low price. All the other stuff, yes, they want good quality parts and whatever. They claim they do, but they're not willing to pay for them. And we're also seeing now that some of the disputes that Stellantis is having between the part suppliers and itself are spilling out into public. And anytime you see a public dispute like that, you know it's gotten very bad. Supplier relations between automakers and suppliers, even during good times, are a little bit acrimonious at best. So when it's gotten to the point where you have court cases and press releases and that kind of stuff, it's not a good situation. The companies that usually do best with dealing with their suppliers are Toyota, Honda, and actually General Motors. General Motors used to be the worst, but they learned. They figured out after all the years of trying to pinch pennies and cost cut that they just ended up with poor quality parts and poor quality products. And if you're a customer dealing with a cheap plastic water pump that broke and cost you maybe thousands of dollars and caused your car to overheat, you're going to remember that, and you're probably not going to buy another car from that company. So everything that Stellantis is doing here seems to be very short-term thinking. They're trying to cut costs now in hopes that nobody notices later on, and they can still pick up customers and they'll still have repeat customers in the future. I don't think that's a safe bet. People like the Jeep brand here in the United States. It has some level of cachet, and the Ram brand has maybe a little bit too. But Dodge, there's a few people who I think are diehard Dodge enthusiasts, but those folks bought V8 Challengers and Chargers, and maybe the Durango. They're not buying a Hornet. And I think that leads me kind of into the weird product positioning of this car. I do have to ask, who is this car for? If there's one person who I think comes closest to somebody who might like this car, it is actually me. I'm a person who grew up with European cars. I had Volkswagens growing up, and I loved the kind of the quirkiness, the good driving dynamics and all that kind of stuff. And I could see like there's maybe an audience with European car owners with this car, but that's kind of a niche thing. And also getting those folks to switch over to a brand like Dodge, I don't know, most people aren't going to do it. For better or worse, people have strong emotional attachments to the various car brands that are out there. And I don't think there's too many people who have the overlap of being interested in European cars, being interested in a plug-in hybrid, and also being willing to buy a Dodge, at least at full price. There's yet another layer to Stellantis possibly fumbling the ball here, and that's with the dealers. So I don't usually feel bad for car dealers. You know, nobody says, oh, car dealers are wonderful and we love dealing with them. There's certainly a lot of bad car dealers out there, and I've had my fair share of experiences, but there are actually a few good ones that seem like good people trying to do the right thing. But here again is where Stellantis is just making ridiculous decisions. They need to discount the Hornet seriously if they want to have any chance of moving them off of dealer lots. And understand, dealers really need them to move off the lots. Dealers pay what's called floor plan financing. And that is basically when a dealer gets a new car from the factory, they don't actually own it outright. They're kind of renting or leasing it or making payments on it. And when interest rates are up, as they are right now, keeping a car around for an entire year costs a lot of money in floor plan financing. When I went to pick up the car for the test drive, they printed out this window sticker, and I don't know how well you can see this, but they wrote on here a discount, like without me even asking. They're saying, oh, look, you can get $6,000 in discounts. And from what I can tell, based on like the invoice price of the car, knowing generally how the business works, they're taking a haircut on this car. They're already losing money selling me this car if I were going to buy it. And yet, it is nowhere near the price I would need it to be to actually consider buying it. Again, absent all the problems that it had. So Stellantis seems to have this expectation that dealers are going to lose money hand over fist getting rid of these cars. And that's just not realistic to have dealers lose thousands of dollars on each sale. They're not going to be able to do that. And I think the other group that's really getting taken to the cleaners here are the auto workers. And I'm thinking of auto workers both in the United States and the ones in Italy who built the Hornet. The folks there in Pomigliano d'Arco had high hopes that having this new product, having the Tonale, would be a great opportunity for them to have more secure employment. And unfortunately, that's just not working out. So yeah, it's a really honestly sad situation that everybody here basically seems to be losing, except for the CEO. The CEO was the highest paid industry executive in the whole automotive space last year. And that kind of blows my mind that you can be running a company into the ground and make all this money. I guess it shouldn't surprise me. That's kind of the way of the world. But it just shows you how broken everything is. And I think the last thing I'll say is I really am not here to dunk on the Hornet. I didn't want to make a bad video about it. I didn't go in hoping, ooh, I hope I can show how terrible this car is. I wanted this car to be good. And I feel for all the people being affected by everything that's gone wrong here. I really hope, honestly, for all the people, the workers, the engineers, the dealers that are just trying to keep their heads above water, I hope that Stellantis can turn things around. But with the direction they're going right now, it's really not looking good. I think that about wraps up my video. And it wasn't what I was expecting it to be. I don't know what you were hoping for, but hopefully you learned something today and got something out of it. If you're not already subscribed to Ben's Eco Adventure, make sure you hit that subscribe button. And give this video a thumbs up. It really does help out. The Bolt's back. Thanks for watching.